I used to think the scariest stories were the ones that happened far away, in some abandoned house, a dark forest, a desolate highway. But I was wrong. The real nightmares, the ones that steal your sleep, are the ones that happen just a few feet away, right next door. And what happened with my neighbor, it's something I'll never forget. And after you hear it, neither will you. Because what I discovered was worse than I could have ever imagined. Stick around, because the scariest part, I almost didn't catch it in time. It started 2 summers ago. I had just moved into this small townhouse community, a quiet row of homes in a sleepy suburb. Wasn't new to the city, but I was new to this street. And from day one, everyone told me the same thing. This is a good neighborhood. Safe, friendly. They weren't wrong. Kids played outside. People waved hello. It was the kind of place where nothing bad was supposed to happen. And my neighbor, the one whose house shared a wall with mine, Mr. Dempsey, a man in his late 40s, always polite, always quiet, maybe too quiet. I never saw visitors come or go. No parties, no noise, not even a dog bark. At first I figured he was just private, maybe a little introverted. We all have neighbors like that, right? Little did I know, behind those closed doors, something dark was growing. And soon, I would find myself in the middle of it. But before I tell you how it all unraveled and what I found hidden in that house next door, there's something else you should know about Mr. Dempsey. Something I ignored. But you shouldn't, because the first sign came just a few weeks after I moved in, and at the time, I thought it was nothing. It was late one night. I had fallen asleep on the couch watching TV. Around 2 a.m., I woke to a strange noise, a soft thudding coming through the shared wall, rhythmic, slow, almost like something being dragged. I sat up, listening. The sound stopped. The next morning I shrugged it off. Maybe it was furniture moving. Maybe he had dropped something. I barely knew the man. I wasn't about to knock and ask, "Hey, were you dragging a body across the floor last night?" But that wasn't the only thing. A few days later, I noticed something odd in the backyard. Mr. Dempsey was standing perfectly still in his garden, just staring at the ground. For nearly 20 minutes he didn't move, he didn't bend down, he didn't plant anything, just stood there, staring. It was unsettling. But again, maybe he was just odd. People grieve, people think, have their moments. But then came the smell. Late July, the heat was brutal, and one humid afternoon, an awful odor started wafting through the courtyard between our houses. Rotten, sweet and sour, sickly strong. I thought maybe something had died. Under the porch, a raccoon, a bird. But the smell seemed stronger when I got closer to Mr. Dempsey's side of the fence. Now I was getting uneasy. I even mentioned it to another neighbor. They agreed the smell was bad, but said, "Don't worry, he probably knows. He's a responsible guy, just a quiet one." Still, something about it wouldn't sit right with me. That night, lying in bed, I kept thinking, what if something is seriously wrong over there? What if he needs help? Or worse. The next morning, I made a decision. I was going to knock on his door and check in. But before I could, something strange happened. A delivery truck pulled up, and the driver brought a heavy-looking crate to Mr. Dempsey's porch. No labels, no store name. And when Dempsey opened the door, he looked around nervously. Then he dragged the crate inside. I watched from my window, heart racing. What was in that box? I needed answers, but at that point, I had no idea how deep this would go, or how close I was to stepping into a nightmare. Next few nights, more noises came through the wall. This time, louder, more frantic. I couldn't sleep, and then one morning I noticed the odor was stronger, almost unbearable. That's when I called the HOA, asked if anyone could do a wellness check. They said they'd send someone in a few days. A few days? I wasn't going to wait that long. That night, I decided to take a closer look myself. I went out to the backyard, near the fence that divided our properties. That's when I saw it, fresh dirt, a patch of earth recently disturbed, with uneven shoveling marks. I knelt down and felt the soil. Still damp, my mind raced. Why would anyone dig here? In the middle of the night? Was this a grave? Now I was scared. This was no longer just curiosity. Something was very, very wrong. Next door, I called the police. They came late that night, 2 officers. I told them everything. The noises, the smell, the crate, the fresh dirt. They knocked on Dempsey's door, no answer. They knocked again. Finally, the door creaked open and there he was, pale, sweaty, eyes sunken. The officers asked to come inside. At first he refused, said he was sick, but the smell hit them immediately and legally. That gave them probable cause. What they found inside was far worse than anything I'd could have imagined. Now, before I tell you what the police discovered, let me say this. Sometimes, you think you know a person, but behind closed doors, a different reality can exist, and in this case, that reality was horrifying. The house was dark, windows covered in thick curtains, furniture pushed oddly against the walls, but the worst part was the basement. The officers went down with flashlights and, there, in the damp shadows, they found it. Dozens of jars, filled with remains, unrecognizable, preserved, labeled with strange symbols. In one corner, a pile of decomposing animal carcasses and something else. Photographs, hundreds of them, pictures, of people, women, children, even neighbors, some candid, some unsettlingly close, and in one chilling frame, a photo of me, taken from behind my own backyard fence. That moment changed everything. I had been watched, targeted, and the noises, the smells, signs I had ignored. Now I realized, I had been living next to a predator, a disturbed man with dark intentions. And had I not called the police when I did, who knows what could have happened next. Mr. Dempsey was arrested that night. The evidence was enough to charge him with multiple counts of animal cruelty, stalking, and suspected involvement in missing persons cases. Later, investigators linked him to a string of disappearances over the last decade. The quiet neighbor had been hiding in plain sight, and I had almost become his next victim to this day. I still think about those first little signs, the sounds, the smell, the crate, the backyard dirt dot, and I wonder if I had ignored them longer, would I even be here to tell this story? So if you ever get that uneasy feeling, if you notice something strange about the quiet neighbor next door, trust your instincts that it might just save your life. There's something unsettling about sounds you can't explain, especially when they come from the house right next to yours. Low, muffled, rhythmic dot. At first you tell yourself it's nothing, pipes, the wind, maybe a radio left on, but when it happens again and again, late at night, always the same time, always from that house, you start to wonder, what are they doing down there? This is a true story, and trust me, by the time it was over, I wished I'd never ignored those sounds. Because what I found out was darker than I ever could have imagined. It happened about 3 years ago. I had just signed a lease on a small 2-story townhouse. Nothing fancy, but cozy, affordable, and the best part, the neighborhood was supposed to be peaceful, a place where nothing bad ever really happened. That's what my landlord told me anyway. And my next door neighbors, a young couple, Greg and Amanda, early 30s, they kept to themselves, friendly enough, but not overly chatty. The perfect neighbors, I thought. Quiet, private. Or so I thought. But within a few weeks, something started to feel off. And before long, I would discover that what was happening in their basement was something no one was supposed to hear. Or survive. It started subtly, a dull thumping sound. Late at night, usually after midnight. It wasn't loud, but it was steady, almost like someone was hammering softly, again and again, deep underground. First time I noticed, I thought it was construction, maybe they were remodeling, but night after night, the same sound returned, always around the same time, a rhythmic knock, 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 sometimes lasting an hour or more. And then there were the voices, muffled, impossible to make out, but I knew this. They weren't arguing, they weren't casual conversations, it was chanting. Then came the smell, faint at first, a strange, metallic odor, almost like iron. Then stronger, bitter, acrid, that it seemed to seep through the vents between our houses. I'd catch whiffs of it late at night, and every time it was followed by those sounds, and those strange, eerie voices. That's when I knew this wasn't normal. I started paying closer attention to Greg and Amanda. During the day, they acted normal enough. Greg left for work in a beat-up sedan. Amanda usually stayed home, but I began noticing small things. Amanda rarely went outside anymore, and when she did, she wore long sleeves and heavy sunglasses, even on cloudy days. Her skin looked pale, and Greg, his behavior had changed too. He looked tired, gaunt, always glancing around nervously. Then one day, I overheard something through the open window, a single sentence from Greg, whispered harshly, "It has to be finished by the solstice." The solstice. Why would that matter? What were they preparing for? Whatever it was, I was about to find out. A week later, things escalated. The sounds grew louder, no longer just thumping, now it was dragging, scraping, heavy objects being moved across the basement floor, and the voices clearer now. I still couldn't make out the language, but it chilled me to my core that it wasn't English. It wasn't any language I recognized, deep, guttural almost. Inhuman. One night I couldn't take it anymore. I knocked on their door, no answer. I knocked again, still nothing, but through the thin wood I could hear them down there, chanting. I called the landlord. I called the police. I reported strange noises, suspicious activity. The police came out, knocked, but Greg answered, looking half-asleep. He insisted nothing was wrong. No remodeling, no music, no strange smells. The officers left. But that very night the sounds doubled, more urgent, faster. And the smell, almost unbearable now. Thick, metallic, nauseating. I knew something had to be done. So I started digging through property records, old news archives. That's when I found it. Greg and Amanda weren't the first tenants here. The last couple, a middle-aged pair, had vanished under mysterious circumstances 5 years ago. Missing persons unsolved, and before them, a history of short-term tenants, each one moving out after just a few months. Something was wrong with that house, and something was happening in that basement. I decided I was going to find out what, but I had no idea how dangerous that decision would be. One night, around 3 a.m., the sounds were the loudest they had ever been. Curiosity and fear got the better of me. I slipped around to their back door, and to my surprise, it was slightly ajar. My heart pounded. Against my better judgment, I stepped inside. The house was dark, silent, except for the noise below. I crept down the basement stairs, and what I saw will haunt me for the rest of my life. The basement was lit by dozens of candles. The walls were covered in strange symbols painted in red. In the center of the floor, a crude stone altar, and surrounding it, Greg and Amanda swaying, the eyes rolled back, their mouths moving in unnatural rhythm. In their hands, bloody knives, and on the altar, something alive. A small animal barely moving, but the air was wrong. It felt thick, electric, heavy, like something unseen was watching. I gasped, and in that instant Greg looked up, his eyes black, empty. "You shouldn't be here," he whispered. I ran. I didn't look back. I fled out the door, across the street, and called the police again, this time panicked, hysterical. When they arrived, Greg and Amanda were gone. Vanished. But in the basement they found the altar, the symbols, the blood, enough evidence to launch a full investigation. But here's the thing. Greg and Amanda were never seen again. The landlord claimed he had no forwarding address. No trace of them ever found to this day. That basement stays empty. The landlord can't rent the unit. No one will take it, and sometimes, when the wind is right, I swear you can still hear it. That rhythmic thumping. Coming from beneath the floorboards. So, next time you hear strange sounds coming from a neighbor's house, don't ignore it, because what's happening behind those walls might be more horrifying than you could ever imagine. There's something deeply unsettling about knowing someone is watching you. Not accidentally, not in passing, but deliberately, every single day. That's what happened to me. And for a long time I tried to pretend it wasn't real, that it was harmless, that it was all in my head. But it wasn't, because one night, I finally saw what he was doing behind those curtains. And from that moment, my life was never the same again. This happened last year when I moved into a small rental house after a rough breakup. It was a quiet street in an older part of town, single-story homes. Big oak trees, chain-link fences seemed like a good place to start fresh. My next-door neighbor was an older man, mid-60s maybe, thin, balding. Never spoke, never waved, but always there, always in the window watching. At first, it just seemed weird, harmless. Until little things started happening. Things that told me this wasn't some lonely old man. There was something very, very wrong going on next door. And by the time I found out the truth, it was already too late. It started the first week I moved in. Every morning, when I'd leave for work, there he was, standing at the second window of his living room. Thin curtains pulled slightly apart, just enough for his face to peek through, staring directly at my front door. I told myself, it's just curiosity, new neighbor, small street, old man's probably bored, nothing to worry about. But then, it wasn't just mornings, it was all the time. Whenever I'd glance over, there he was. Afternoon, evening, middle of the night when I'd get up for water. Always there, watching. It started making me paranoid. I'd come home late and feel eyes on me as I unlocked the door. I'd hear faint creaks from the side yard, footsteps. But when I'd check, nothing. No one there. Still. That window, that face. Watching. Then, one afternoon, a small package showed up on my porch. No return address, no postage, just my first name, handwritten in shaky letters. Inside was a single Polaroid photo, black and white, taken through a window, of me, Sleeping in my bed, I dropped it in shock. How? When? I always kept my doors locked, my blinds closed. My skin crawled. I called the police. An officer came out, listened to my story, looked at the photo. His advice: it's probably a prank. Maybe. Neighborhood kids, just be careful. That was it, no help. But that night, the watching didn't stop. If anything, it got worse. Around 2 a.m., I woke suddenly, not from a dream, from a sound, a faint tap, tap tap, coming from the living room window. I grabbed my phone and crept out, pulled the curtain back, just a crack, and there he was standing in my yard, inches from the glass. Eyes wide, smiling, hands pressed to the window. Tap, 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 tap. Froze. My heart slammed in my chest. I snapped a photo and called 911, but by the time they arrived, he was gone. The officers took another statement, but again, no action. We'll keep an eye on it, they said. But that night, for the first time, I realized this wasn't going to stop. It was going to get worse, and I had to find out why. The next day, I started asking around. Neighbors, mail carrier, even the landlord. What I learned was disturbing. The man's name was Richard, lived alone, no family. Had been in that house for nearly 30 years, and over the years there were rumors, strange noises, odd smells. One neighbor swore they'd seen him digging in the backyard at 3 a.m. Another said a woman had lived there once, but hadn't been seen for years. But no proof, no reports, no arrests, just stories. And now, it was me he was watching. Things escalated fast. The next night the sounds began. Scraping, dragging, soft thuds against the shared fence between our yards. I barely slept. Then another package. This time, a small bundle of hair tied with twine. My hair. I was done. I took off work and made a plan that day. When I saw him leave in an old rusted truck, I acted. Snuck around back, past the weeds and broken lawn chairs. A side door unlocked. The house smelled of mildew and something far worse. I crept inside. Room after room, hoarded junk, dust, old newspapers stacked to the ceiling. Then I found the basement door, slightly ajar, cold air drifting up. I descended slowly, step by step, and what I found down there, I'll never forget. The basement was lined with shelves covered in dozens of Polaroids. All of different women's, different years, different faces, all taken through windows, all while they slept. And in the center of the room, a single mattress, dirty, stained. Chains bolted to the floor, a video camera set on a tripod. And taped to the wall was a newspaper clipping, an article about me. About my move to the neighborhood, with my photo circled in red ink. I ran out the door, across the yard, called the police, again frantic, breathless. This time, when they came, they saw that. Searched the house. Found the basement. Found the photos. Found evidence of other women who had lived on that street, women who had vanished over the years. Richard was arrested that night, but here's the thing, during the search, they never found any bodies. To this day, they don't know how many victims there were, or where they went. Richard never spoke a word after the arrest. He sits in a state hospital now, unfit to stand trial. And me, I moved far away, new city, new name. But sometimes, when I wake up in the middle of the night, I swear I can still feel eyes on me. Watching, waiting. So if you ever catch a neighbor watching you, don't ignore it, and don't tell yourself it's harmless. Because sometimes, the ones you think are just lonely, are hiding much darker things than you can imagine. Want to hear more true horror stories? Check out the next video on my channel. You won't believe what happened to the woman in that one. And as always, stay safe out there. What would you do if you started hearing knocking from inside your walls? At first you tell yourself it's nothing. Pipes, the house settling, rats, maybe. But when the knocking starts coming at the same time, every single night, then you hear whispering, and then you realize it's coming from your neighbor's side of the house. You'll start to wonder what is going on in there. This is a true story. And by the time you hear what I found, you'll never sleep the same way again. That it happened when I moved into a small duplex rental about 2 years ago. I was new to the city, just took a job downtown, didn't know anyone. The duplex seemed perfect, cheap, quiet, private, only one neighbor, a guy named Walter, early 50s, single, lived alone in the other unit, didn't talk much, kept to himself, the kind of neighbor you think is ideal until the noises began. At first, it was easy to ignore, a little knocking here, a little scratching there, old house, shared walls. I figured it was normal, but what I didn't know was that what I was hearing wasn't coming from the walls, it was coming from something inside them. The first time it happened, it was about 1:30 in the morning. I woke up needing a glass of water. As I walked past the living room wall, I heard it knock. Knock knock. 3 slow taps. Steady, deliberate. I froze, glass in hand. Was it from the front door? I checked, nothing. Was it from the floor, the windows? No, it was coming from inside the living room wall, the one I shared with Walter. I stood there, confused, listening, then nothing, just silence. I figured maybe plumbing. Tried to forget about it. But over the next few nights, it kept happening. Always at 1:30 a.m. 3 knocks. Every time, sometimes louder, sometimes softer, but always there. I asked Walter about it once when I ran into him by the mailboxes. He just smiled slightly and said, "Old houses make strange noises," and then walked away. But it wasn't just knocks anymore. Soon there were whispers, faint, raspy, almost like a woman's voice, muffled, impossible to make out the words. But always after the knocks. Always around 1:30 a.m., Walter started acting strange. I'd see him outside sometimes, pacing the yard late at night, muttering to himself, digging little holes along the fence line only to fill them back in. And more than once, I noticed dark stains on his clothes, like old paint. Something else. I started getting nervous, but then one night, it got worse. Around 3 a.m., I woke up to a new sound. Not knocking, not whispers, scratching, furious, desperate scratching, coming from inside the same wall, like nails, claws, scraping at wood. It lasted for nearly 15 minutes. I sat up in bed, frozen. Then it stopped, silenced, until I heard, faintly, a voice from Walter's side of the duplex. "Stay still, stay quiet, it'll stop soon." I knew something was wrong, terribly wrong, and I had to find out what was going on. But I didn't know that what I'd discover would change everything the next morning. I made a decision. When Walter left, I'd go inside his unit. I'd never seen him have visitors. Never. Heard a TV. And if I was wrong, fine, but if I was right. So when I heard his truck pull out around noon, I grabbed the spare key I'd found hidden behind my breaker box, probably left by an old tenant, and crept inside. The smell hit me first. Rot, damp, decay. The inside of his place was dark, every window covered. The living room was stacked with old books, strange symbols on the covers, and jars filled with things I didn't want to identify. But it was the wall that caught my eye, the one I shared. Large sections of the drywall had been removed, leaving wooden beams exposed, and built inside was a small, crude space, no bigger than a closet, and inside it, a mattress, chains, and a figure. A young woman. Thin, pale eyes, wide with terror, bruised wrists and ankles, gagged. She looked at me, pleading silently. I yanked the chains loose and pulled her out. She could barely stand, tears streaming down her face. We fled out the back door. I called 911 from the yard. When police arrived, the woman told them everything. She'd been missing for nearly 2 months, abducted, kept hidden inside that wall cavity. Walter had built it himself. That's what I'd been hearing, her knocking, her scratching, her whispers, begging for someone, anyone, to hear. Walter was arrested that night, but here's the part that still chills me. The officers said in the basement, they found signs that he'd done this before. Remnants of old chains, bones of small animals, and a notebook filled with drawings of walls, and lists of names. Most crossed out, some not. So if you ever hear knocking coming from inside your walls, don't assume it's just the house settling. Listen, because someone might be trying to tell you that something very, very wrong is happening, and you might be the only one who can stop it. If you want more real-life horror stories, check out the next video on my channel. And remember, stay safe, stay alert. And always trust your instincts. It's one thing when you move into a new neighborhood, and the neighbors are a little strange, weird even. You shrug it off, it's just their business, right? But what if one day you realized that person wasn't supposed to be there at all, that the neighbor you've been seeing, waving to, was never supposed to be living there in the first place? That's what happened to me. And the deeper I dug, the worse it got, because what I uncovered was something far more disturbing than I could have imagined. This all happened about 3 years ago. I'd just started my new job at a publishing house, long hours, low pay. So when I found a cheap little rental on the outskirts of town, I jumped at it. A row of old TOWNHOMES. Rundown, sure, but affordable. And quiet, just what I needed. The place was owned by an elderly landlord, Mrs. Carmody. She lived a few doors down. When I signed the lease, she told me, most of the units are empty, only a few tenants left. Older folks, you'll like it here, and I did. at first. Until I started noticing things about the man in Unit 6, little things that didn't make sense. And when I finally uncovered the truth about who or what he really was, it was too late to leave. My first couple weeks there were uneventful, busy with work, long days. Most of the other units seemed empty, no lights at night, no sound, except for Unit 6. The windows were always dark, blinds drawn. But sometimes, late at night, I'd hear soft footsteps in the hall, or catch a glimpse of movement through the peephole. An older man, tall, thin, dressed in shabby, old-fashioned clothes, like something from another era, never smiled, just shuffled along, head down, didn't respond to greetings, but I figured maybe just eccentric, no big deal, until things got stranger. One night, around 3 a.m, I woke up suddenly. My room was freezing cold. I got up to check the heat, and noticed something odd, a light faint and flickering, coming from beneath my front door, which didn't make sense. There were no hall lights on this floor. I crept to the door, peered through the peephole. The hallway was dark except for a dim glow, coming from under the door of Unit 6. An eerie, pulsing, blue light, like an old television. But when I listened closely, I heard something else, a low, droning sound, a voice chanting. I backed away, unsettled. Maybe he was just into weird stuff. But night after night, the same thing. Always at 3 a.m. The blue light, the chanting. I tried to ignore it until the knocking started. That's when I knew something was wrong. About a month after moving in, it began first, soft knocks on my door around midnight. 3 quick taps. Always when the hallway was empty, no one there. When I checked, then louder. Sometimes on my window, second floor. Impossible then. The scratching from the walls, as if someone or something was inside. I finally brought it up to Mrs. Carmody one afternoon. Hey, who's the guy in Unit 6? She looked confused. No one's in 6. That one's been vacant for years. Condemned. Actually, dry rot, unsafe floorboards. No one can live there. I blinked. No, someone is living there. I've seen him, heard him. She shook her head firmly. Impossible. The key's in my possession. I'm the only one with access. You must be mistaken, but I wasn't. And that night, I decided to prove it. I set up an old phone as a motion-activated camera, pointed at the hallway, left it running overnight. The next morning, footage showed an empty hallway until 2:59 a.m. Then the camera glitched. For about 10 seconds. Nothing. When it came back, the door to Unit 6 was slightly ajar. No one in sight, but faint blue light pulsing from inside. Then 3:11 a.m. a shape. Tall, thin. The man, emerging slowly, unnaturally, walking past my door, stopping for several long seconds, facing it. Then moving on, back toward Unit 6, door closing behind him. At that point, I was scared. I started digging Old Town records, library archives. And that's when I found it. A news clipping from 1979. Local man dies in townhouse fire, Unit 6. Picture of a tall, thin man. Same clothes, same face. The article said the fire had started under mysterious circumstances. Foul play suspected. But here's the thing, no renovations had been done since. That unit was condemned. No power, no water, no way someone should be living there. I tried to move out, told Mrs. Carmody I'd broken my lease. She just looked at me, sad, tired. It always happens this way, she whispered. He always finds someone to watch, and when they leave, he finds another. Her words chilled me that night. I barricaded my door, but around 3 a.m. the knocking came again. Not at the door this time. From the inside walls, the chanting grew louder. The blue light seeped in through the cracks. And then the whispers. Stay. You belong here now. Stay. I snapped. Grabbed my flashlight, forced myself out into the hall, straight to Unit 6. Door unlocked, creaked open. Inside ruins, collapsed floorboards, exposed beams, rotting furniture, and in the center, a burned spot on the floor, charred, blackened, smell of ash and old smoke. And standing in the corner, the man, watching me, mouth moving, chanting words I couldn't understand. And for a split second his eyes locked with mine. Empty, black eye. Fled. Ran from the building, didn't stop until I reached the street. I moved out that weekend, didn't even return for my things, left town entirely. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear knocking, and I wonder, did I really leave him behind, or did something follow me? If you ever move somewhere, and you notice a neighbor who shouldn't be there, trust your instincts. Because sometimes the past doesn't stay buried, and sometimes the dead don't stay dead. It's one thing when you move into a new neighborhood, and the neighbors are a little strange, weird even. You shrug it off, it's just their business, right? But what if one day you realize that person wasn't supposed to be there at all, that the neighbor you've been seeing, waving to, was never supposed to be living there in the first place? That's what happened to me. And the deeper I dug, the worse it got, because what I uncovered was something far more disturbing than I could have imagined. This all happened about 3 years ago. I'd just started my new job at a publishing house, long hours, low pay. So when I found a cheap little rental on the outskirts of town, I jumped at it. A row of old TOWNHOMES. Rundown, sure, but affordable. And quiet. Just what I needed. The place was owned by an elderly landlord, Mrs. Carmody. She lived a few doors down. When I signed the lease, she told me, most of the units are empty, only a few tenants left. Older folks like it here, and I did. At first. Until I started noticing things about the man in Unit 6, little things that didn't make sense, and when I finally uncovered the truth about who or what he really was, it was too late to leave. My first couple weeks there were uneventful, busy with work, long days. Most of the other units seemed empty, no lights at night, no sound, except for Unit 6. The windows were always dark, blinds drawn, but sometimes, late at night, I'd hear soft footsteps in the hall, or catch a glimpse of movement through the PEEPHOLE. An older man. Tall, thin, dressed in shabby, old-fashioned clothes, like something from another era, never smiled, just shuffled along, head down, didn't respond to greetings, but I figured maybe just eccentric, no big deal, until things got stranger. One night, around 3 a.m., I woke up suddenly. My room was freezing cold. I got up to check the heat, and noticed something odd, a light faint and flickering, coming from beneath my front door, which didn't make sense. There were no hall lights on this floor. I crept to the door, peered through the peephole. The hallway was dark, except for a dim glow, coming from under the door of Unit 6. An eerie, pulsing, blue light, like an old television. But when I listened closely, I heard something else, a low, droning sound, a voice, chanting. I backed away, unsettled. Maybe he was just into weird stuff. But night after night, the same thing. Always at 3 a.m. The blue light, the chanting. I tried to ignore it until the knocking started. That's when I knew something was wrong. About a month after moving in, it began first. Soft knocks on my door around midnight. 3 quick taps. Always when the hallway was empty, no one there when I checked. Then louder. Sometimes on my window, second floor. Impossible. Then the scratching from the walls. As if someone or something was inside. I finally brought it up to Mrs. Carmody one afternoon. Hey, who's the guy in Unit 6? She looked confused. No one's in 6. That one's been vacant for years. Condemned. Actually, dry rot. Unsafe floorboards. No one can live there. I blinked. No, someone is living there. I've seen him, heard him. She shook her head firmly. Impossible. The key's in my possession. I'm the only one with access. You must be mistaken, but I wasn't. And that night, I decided to prove it. I set up an old phone as a motion-activated camera, pointed at the hallway, left it running overnight. The next morning, footage showed an empty hallway until 2:59 a.m. Then the camera glitched. For about 10 seconds, nothing. When it came back, the door to Unit 6 was slightly ajar. No one in sight, but faint blue light pulsing from inside. Then, at 3:11 a.m., a shape. Tall, thin. The man, emerging slowly, unnaturally, walking past my door, stopping for several long seconds, facing it. Then, moving on, back toward Unit 6. Door closing behind him. At that point, I was scared. I started digging Old Town records, library archives. And that's when I found it. A news clipping from 1979. Local man dies in townhouse fire. Unit 6. Picture of a tall, thin man. Same clothes, same face. The article said the fire had started under mysterious circumstances. Number, foul play suspected. But here's the thing. No renovations had been done since. That unit was condemned. No power, no water, no way someone should be living there. I tried to move out, told Mrs. Carmody I'd broken my lease. She just looked at me, sad, tired. It always happens this way, she whispered. He always finds someone to watch, and when they leave, he finds another. Her words chilled me that night. I barricaded my door, but around 3 a.m., the knocking came again. Not at the door this time. From the inside walls, the chanting grew louder. The blue light seeped in through the cracks, and then the whispers. Stay You belong here. Now stay. I snapped. Grabbed my flashlight, forced myself out into the hall straight to Unit 6. Door unlocked, creaked open. Inside ruins, collapsed floorboards, exposed beams, rotting furniture, and in the center, a burned spot on the floor, charred, blackened, smell of ash and old smoke, and standing in the corner, the man watching me. Mouth moving, chanting words I couldn't understand, and for a split second, his eyes locked with mine. Empty. Black. I fled. Ran from the building. Didn't stop until I reached the street. I moved out that weekend, didn't even return for my things, left town entirely. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear knocking, and I wonder, did I really leave him behind, or did something follow me? If you ever move somewhere, and you notice a neighbor who shouldn't be there, trust your instincts. Because sometimes the past doesn't stay buried, and sometimes the dead don't stay dead. Okay, first 60 seconds. Most people think they know their neighbors. You see them in the hallway, maybe chat at the mailbox, exchange a friendly smile, but behind closed doors, you never really know what's going on, what secrets people keep, what darkness lives in the apartment next to yours. I moved into a new place about a year ago. It seemed perfect, a quiet building, safe neighborhood, until I met the couple in 6A, polite, soft-spoken, normal, at first. But as time went on, I began to notice things, small things, and then bigger things, until I couldn't ignore it anymore, and by the time I realized the truth, it was too late. Because some neighbors, they don't just watch you, they want something from you, and they won't stop until they get it. I'd been looking for a new place for months, nothing too fancy, just something quiet where I could focus on my freelance work. Finally found this mid-century building, only 10 units, solid concrete walls, beautiful old oak floors. Perfect. I moved into 6B on the top floor. Next door was apartment 6A. That's where they lived. Walter and Denise. Mid-40s, maybe 50. Soft-spoken, well-dressed. They introduced themselves right away. Even brought me cookies on my first day. We like to welcome new neighbors, Walter said with a smile. They seemed nice, a little old-fashioned maybe, but harmless. At first, everything was fine, but after a few weeks, I started noticing things. Sounds through the wall. Not loud music. No, something else. Chanting. Soft, rhythmic, low voices, almost like singing, but always in a language I didn't recognize. And always at night. I figured, hey, maybe they were into meditation, or had a weird hobby I wasn't going to judge. But then, I started finding things, small piles of salt outside my door, strange symbols, drawn faintly in chalk along the hallway, and sometimes, I'd catch Walter or Denise watching me. Not saying a word, just standing in their doorway, staring. One night, I came home late, around midnight. As I walked up the stairs, I heard voices, low, urgent, coming from their apartment. The door was ajar, just a crack, and I could see flickering candlelight inside, and there were people there, 5 or 6 figures, all in dark robes. Faces obscured. And in the center of the room, something was hanging from the ceiling. I couldn't see clearly, but it looked wrong. Twisted. Human-shaped. I didn't stick around, ran straight into my place, bolted the door, told myself, it's none of your business, don't get involved. But the next morning, the hallway was spotless, like nothing had happened, except for one thing. On my door, in tiny letters, was a single word scratched into the wood. Soon, a few days later, I bumped into another neighbor, Jill from 4C. She looked nervous. Have you seen Aaron? She asked. Aaron was the guy who'd lived in 5A right below Walter and Denise. Nice guy, young, worked nights. I hadn't seen him in a while. He hasn't been home for days, Jill said. His mail's piling up. Later that night I checked. She was right. Mailbox stuffed full. And through the peephole on his door, the apartment was dark. No sounds. I knocked. No answer. Called the landlord, left a message, but no one ever came. And Aaron was never seen again. A week later, the smell started. Thick, cloying. Like copper and rot. It seeped into the hallway, especially around 6A. I complained to the landlord again. No response, so I knocked on Walter and Denise's door. Walter answered, eyes a little too wide, smile a little too forced. Everything fine in there? I asked. Something smells off. Oh, just some old plumbing issues, he said, and quickly shut the door. But that night, I saw them, through my peephole, carrying large black bags, down to the basement. 2 trips. No words. And when they came back upstairs, their hands were stained dark red. At this point, I was terrified, barely slept, kept a knife on my nightstand, but the more I watched, the weirder it got. Sometimes I'd wake up and my apartment would be unlocked, or little trinkets would appear on my table. Bones, feathers, coins, and one night my bathroom mirror was covered in condensation, but I hadn't used the shower, and in the fog. AHANDPRINT. Not mine. Desperate. I started digging, went to the city archives, looked up the building's history, and what I found chilled me. Back in the 70s, there had been disappearances. 3 tenants vanished within a year. The case was never solved, but in the police reports, one name kept coming up: Walter and Denise Blackwell, residents of 6A, the same apartment, the same names, but that was impossible. That had been 50 years ago. I decided I had to get out, made plans to move. But that night my phone rang at 3:03 a.m., unknown number. I answered, and a voice, low, wet, whispered, "You can't leave. It's already begun." Click. Then the power went out. Total darkness. And through the walls, the chanting began again, louder than ever, and beneath it, something else, a sound like wet slithering and scratching. From inside my walls I grabbed my bag, bolted for the door, but the hallway was full of figures, dark robes, dozens of them, blocking the stairs, and at the front, Walter and Denise, smiling eyes, black as pitch. "It's time," Denise said. I don't remember much. Somehow, I made it to the fire escape, climbed down 6 stories, ran until dawn, never looked back, never went back. I left everything behind. I moved across the state, changed my number, didn't tell anyone where I was going. But even now, a year later, it isn't over. Every night at 3:03 a.m. my phone rings. An unknown number. I never answer, but the voicemail is always the same. A single whisper: "Soon." So if you ever move into a new place, and your neighbors seem a little too perfect, a little too polite, and you start hearing strange sounds at night, don't ignore it, because once they choose you, there's no way out.